Money emerges 70,000 years ago, at least, as a new language. Money is a language that uses tokens originally. Feathers, beads, pebbles, shells. That allows people who are in these communities to expand their form of language to express value to each other. And the essential form of money is that you cannot consume it. Bananas are not money because you can eat them. They're a commodity. You exchange them for other things. The quintessential thing about money is that it has no intrinsic value. There's nothing valuable about a seashell, especially if it's by the seaside, which is where she should not be selling seashells, because that's where they have the least value. And then we find seashells in Neanderthal caves thousands of miles from the seashore. And that is money. Because it's rare, it's transportable, it has aesthetic value, and it can be used to lubricate social bonds, to create connections, even with complete strangers who will recognize the aesthetic value of this thing at first sight and want it in exchange for other things. And that suddenly creates this explosion in human community. Money isn't evil, it's a tool. It's a tool of language that we use to build community. But somewhere along the line, we went astray. It used to be that money was the system by which a person would communicate value to another person. And today, with the exception of cash, it is almost impossible to do that. How many of you here accept credit cards for your personal use? No one, right? So if you wanted to exchange value with our modern system of money, it's no longer person to person. It's person to corporation to corporation to corporation to person. And they each take a small cut. But they don't just take a cut, they take control. They decide what you should and shouldn't spend your money on. So they interject themselves in our conversation of value. Modern money is a system that says, shh, you're not allowed to express that value. When money becomes person to corporation to corporation to person, we've lost our way. And the bad news is that it's going to get a lot worse. If you look at what governments are trying to do around the world, there's a very active conversation now about gradually eradicating cash. Several European countries have limits where you cannot do. It is illegal to do transactions greater than, say, $3,000 in Scandinavia. In France, they proposed a bill to make it illegal to do cash transactions more than $1,000 value approximately. And so they take away our ability to speak value to each other in a form that doesn't involve a corporate or governmental intermediary. So here's the bad news. The future of money is digital, entirely digital. And today we stand at a crossroads. We can choose two possible visions of the future. Digital money that is issued and controlled by governments and corporations, where every transaction you make, ever, is tracked, analyzed, collected, where if you go to the wrong event, associate yourself with the wrong political movement, speak of things that should not be spoken of, then your money will be controlled removed, disappeared, seized, frozen. Try selling something that is perfectly legal in California on PayPal, see what happens. Weed, something like that. You will soon discover the system will say to you, shh, that value communication is not allowed. We are already down this path, and we are going down this path at a frightening speed. Less than 8% of the money in the world exists as cash. 92% of it is spreadsheets, credit cards, bank accounts that don't exist as physical money, that exist only as databases in the hands of corporations and governments. How many of you here have money in the bank? None of you have money in the bank. You have extended a debt-free loan to the bank, which they are leveraging. They pay you back 0.0001% APR, less than inflation. And they turn around and they lend it to your friend for 29.9% APR. And it's not their money, because banks don't lend money. They lend your money. But it's not your money anymore. Every transaction you make is tracked. It creates a record. We are up in arms about the revelations from Edward Snowden that our emails and our phone calls are tracked. Yet none of us noticed that with the passage of the Patriot Act, any podunk sheriff in America can walk into a bank office and seize every detailed record of your bank account without presenting a shred of evidence, a warrant, nothing. All they have to do is send in a fax that has an imposing eagle on the letterhead or a star, and you have no privacy. And they can turn around and put a freeze on your account. And if you transact in large amounts, your bank is going to report you for it. This is the future we're building. A future in which we give control to corporations and governments of the language of value that our species has had for more than 70,000 years. It doesn't matter if you're scared of governments or corporations, because there is no difference. The bottom line is that this will create a horrific fascist dystopia. And if you think it's okay because our government is benevolent, that's great. That's the privilege of being a part of 5% of the human population. 194 currencies, 194 countries. The vast majority of them, you cannot make a distinction between governments, banks, and organized crime. They are one and the same. These are places where if you spend money for the wrong reason, you don't get your bank account seized, you get your children seized. You get seized in the middle of the night. This is happening all around the world. Every time we swipe a credit card, we feed that system. I'm here today to talk about the other path. The other path started on January 3rd, 2009, where the governments of the world had a wet dream of total financial surveillance and control, and an anonymous character called Satoshi Nakamoto shat all over that plan. Bitcoin isn't just money. It is a platform that enables us, once again, to express value to each other on a person-to-person basis, without governments, without corporations, without intermediaries, with complete and total control of our own money. Bitcoin turns the idea of money as a form of speech into the reality, the technical fact that money is a form of speech. It is a content type. It is a media type that transits over the internet just like all of the other communication, and that makes it unstoppable. Bitcoin is about local community. It is about re-engaging payments from person to person. It's about building a society where we're not simply reduced to the only way of paying someone being a tip. That's what we're down to. Cash is used to tip people, and everything else is done through the banking system. And we can now reverse that. But it gets better, because Bitcoin is simultaneously hyper-local for building communities and completely global, borderless, for building one community. It is a system that allows you to trade and exchange value, to speak your value to any human being on this planet in a few seconds for a tiny fee of a few pennies. And once you speak that value, no one can freeze it, no one can censor it, no one can seize it. And Bitcoin is getting more anonymous by the day, making it increasingly impossible to track. This is the fork in the road. We are not choosing between the world as it is today and a future of digital currency. The future of digital currency is happening now. Cash is going to disappear. Children born today will see cash only in museums. And so the choice is simply between two possible digital currency futures: money of the people, or money of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations, of the government, by the government, for the government. And the best part is, you don't have to do anything to make this choice. You don't have to register. You don't have to create an account. You don't have to provide identity, your social security number, a photo of your passport. You can all pull out your smartphone right here, right now. 5 minutes from now, you've downloaded an app called a Bitcoin wallet, any of the hundreds that exist on iPhone or Android. And that app is your browser into the Bitcoin network. And at that moment, you are able to send and receive Bitcoin. Should you invest in it? Should you take your dollars and convert them into Bitcoin? That's the obvious way, but it's not the powerful way to do it. I haven't bought Bitcoin in 4 years. I get paid in Bitcoin. I earn it. And there are thousands of people who are doing that right now. And that is an incredibly powerful choice. Because with that choice, I've achieved two things. First, I've taken the one most important thing that I offer to society, my labor, my passion, my voice, and I move that into the Bitcoin economy and feed that economy. I give my labor, I earn my Bitcoin, and I am part of the global Bitcoin economy instantly. But there's a second part to that that is even more powerful. I haven't just moved my labor into Bitcoin. I've withdrawn it from the dollar system. I have withdrawn it from the currency of war, the currency of corporate control, the currency of oppression. And even if you don't think the dollar is the currency of oppression, ask an Argentinian how they feel about the peso, a Venezuelan, a Chinese person, a Russian, a Ukrainian, a Greek, a Cypriot. When you choose to earn Bitcoin, when you choose to move your productive labor into Bitcoin, you are withdrawing from the system. You are opting out. Now, I'd be a fool if I opted out completely. I pay my taxes. And I pay my taxes for two reasons. One, because I'm not an idiot, and I don't want to go to jail. Al Capone killed hundreds of people and went to jail for life for tax evasion. There is no greater crime you can commit in this country than withdrawing from the tax system. So don't do that. But also because I do appreciate the fact that living in this society as an immigrant who opted in, I made part of a social contract. And I can't control the fact that most of my taxes go towards bombing brown people for their oil. But at least some of my taxes go to single mothers, schools, meals, and things like that. And you can't withdraw from one without withdrawing from the other. But by going into the Bitcoin economy, what I'm doing is I'm tipping the scales, because I can now transact directly with the people in my community. And it's hard. I can't go and buy anything at this festival with Bitcoin. Yet. I have to use pieces of cotton printed with green ink and impregnated with germs and cocaine. And the arsenic, yeah. But that's okay, because gradually things are changing. The funny thing is that what Bitcoin represents is poking a hole in the dam of the global financial system. And it doesn't have to be a big hole. You don't have to blow up the dam. Just make a hole, a tiny crack, a pinprick, and let the weight of the water do the rest. Let trade do the rest. Let global economic inclusion do the rest. We live in a world where 2.5 billion people live in cash-based societies with absolutely no access to banking. 4 billion people are severely underbanked. They can only operate in a single currency, with heavy controls by their governments. They can't change currencies, they can't export their money, they can't import goods and pay for them without a lot of controls. Now, some people say Bitcoin is all about the dark market, the gray economy. I'll take it. Because the gray economy is 60% of this planet's economy. They only call it gray because they don't control it. Informal, person-to-person community transactions are 60% of the world economy. I'll take the 4 billion. They can keep their IRAs and their 401ks and their Visa cards. And we can take every person who's never seen a bank, every person who lives 100 miles from the nearest bank branch, upstream, by canoe, in the Amazonian jungle, and yet has a cell phone tower within reach, and a little battered Nokia cell phone. And we can turn that cell phone, not into a bank account, into a bank. We can turn it into a system that can enable international payments like a wire transfer, a Western Union. We can turn it into a bank account. We can turn it into a mortgage origination service. We can turn it into a loan origination service. And you can take your Bitcoin, your hard-earned Bitcoin, and lend it to 1,000 farmers in Kenya to buy seed. And we can break the barriers and drop the borders and turn money back into humanity's universal language of value. Thank you. now we have another 34 minutes. And rather than me rambling on, I'd like to have a conversation. You have a question?
What's your thoughts on Ethereum?
What are my thoughts on Ethereum? How many people here have heard of Ethereum? All right, tech-savvy audience, very good. So Ethereum is a system that uses essentially the same recipe that Satoshi Nakamoto invented, but puts it to different use. Instead of building a platform that is primarily about currency and sound money, it's a platform for writing contracts, which are basically programs that encode agreements between people. So you can write a program in Ethereum that says, I will put some money into this program, and if I get a third party, like maybe UPS or the post office, to sign that you actually delivered your package, you get the money. And if that doesn't happen, 30 days later, I get my money back. And so you can take things that the system offers us, or pretends to offer us, like consumer protection, and you can put them right under the control of the person who is making the payment. They can decide the terms by which they're going to transact. And not just I pay you, but complex, rich language that can express all kinds of conditions. This is enormously powerful. And in both Ethereum and Bitcoin, you can do some pretty amazing things. Let me give you just one example. There's a woman called, and I'll mispronounce her name, Faresta Farouk, who's an Afghani woman. And she has this program that she runs in Afghanistan called Code to Inspire. It is just breathtaking. She teaches teenage girls in Afghanistan how to write code, how to program, how to write software, and then how to get paid for writing software in Bitcoin from companies and buyers all over the world. And the reason this is fascinating is not just because these girls are learning how to code. It is because in Afghanistan, women are not allowed to own money at all. Their husband has to have the bank account. And when I say husband, what I mean is the 12-year-old girl who shares a tent with the other 5 12-year-old wives has her fortune, anything she owns, controlled by her 65-year-old husband. And you can't fix that by tweaking the system. You can't go in and say, we're going to write a law and allow women to own money in Afghanistan. Say they open a bank account. Any male can traipse in, walk up to the bank manager and say, hey brother, give me the money. Nothing will stop him. The traditions, the culture, the position of women in that culture is so low that they will not have any option. So here's where it gets magic. They set up special Bitcoin contracts called multi-signature contracts. Because if you put all of that Bitcoin that they earned in an account controlled by one of these girls, they would beat them up or kill them to take their money if they found out that they had it. So instead, they have a multi-signature contract where the money is owned jointly by 15 girls. And it takes 8 of them to independently sign a transaction for that money to be spent. So now they have to track down which 8 of them have this capability and beat all of them, if they can find them, right? And what these women are doing is they're building not a nest egg, not a retirement plan, right? They're building an exit strategy. They're building a get the fuck out of here plan. They're using this money to pay people to smuggle them out of the country so they can go as refugees in another country and get an education. this is the power of contracts. It's more than just payments. Yeah. So anonymity is tricky right now. The first basic version of Bitcoin in 2009 has weak pseudonymity, meaning that there's no name associated with any of your transactions, there's no IP address, but there is an address, a Bitcoin address. And if you do enough statistical analysis and you track all of the relationships between all of the addresses, and you find one loose thread, find someone, take them in for questioning, right? Arrest them maybe, and have them divulge one Bitcoin address, you can then tug on that thread and unravel the pseudonymity. So it's not very good. But it's getting better really, really fast. There are now layered networks above it that can mix together different addresses, making it impossible to keep track of who owns what. Even better, the recipe that's being used in Bitcoin has now been used to create a plethora of alternative currencies whose primary focus is extremely strong, cryptographically protected anonymity. Coins like Zero Cash, and Monero, and Dash. And these don't necessarily compete with Bitcoin, they complement it. So you can move from one to the other very, very quickly. And if you need anonymity, you use a coin that gives you anonymity. If you need long-term value, you use a coin that gives you long-term value. We didn't just build one, we built a forest of them. More than 1,000 cryptocurrencies have been launched since 2009, and the pace at which they're being created is accelerating. All right, who has a question? Yes.
I actually just found out who you were like a week ago and non-stop listening to your podcast with Joe Rogan, like non-stop. It's revolutionary. I'm so excited. And but I sound insane. Like everybody just like, I think I just like, I've been like ranting at my girlfriend and frustrating her. Like I don't get what it is. So like, how do you like prevent yourself from like being excited about it and then just coming off as like a freaking psychopath when you're like, it's bad karma to have your money in the banks because they're using it for evil, and then this is the answer to like everything. Like, is there a way to sound less crazy?
How do you, so the question was, how do you channel enthusiasm about these technologies without sounding like a lunatic, right? I like to say that Bitcoin is not in the early adopter phase, it's in the lunatic fringe phase. The early adopters will come later. I don't avoid that. When I discovered Bitcoin, I went into a state of fugue. I lost contact with reality. For short term, not pathologically, exactly. I started spending 18 hours a day reading, listening, reading code, writing code, everything I could absorb about Bitcoin. My obsession was so enormous. And the reason this happened to me is because I'm a geek. I'm a really, really, really geeky geek. And I've done this 6 times in my life. I got my first computer at 10, disappeared for 6 months, learned how to program in 3 languages. Got my first modem in 1985, connected to a bulletin board system in Los Angeles from Athens. My father almost killed me when I got the first telephone bill. 100 hours of long-distance calls in 1985 in Athens. Oops. I got on the internet in 1989, sent my first email, blew my mind, got buried in it. I downloaded my first browser in 1992, NCSA Mosaic. And I can say a phrase that very few people can say. On that day, in that afternoon, I visited all of the web. All 3 sites. And then I visited them again to see if they had been updated. They hadn't. And then I called all my friends over and we visited them again. and I disappeared down this rabbit hole. And then in 2011, I first heard about Bitcoin, and my initial reaction, which is the same reaction that everybody has, is, ha, nerd money, drugs, gambling, bad, boring. Then I read the white paper, and I went down a rabbit hole. I forgot to eat for about 4 months. I lost 26 pounds because I could not eat. People would bring me a sandwich while I was reading. I'd take one bite, put it down, and it would just sit there. I don't try to not sound like a lunatic. The simple answer is this: I don't give a shit. And the reason I don't is because I glimpse something. I've been primed through these 5 previous experiences, and I sounded like a lunatic. When you go around in 1992 and you tell everyone you know, the web is going to change the world and we're all going to be using it and everybody's going to do their shopping and banking, people laugh at you. Carl Sagan once said, "The trick in science is to know the difference between people thinking you are Bozo the Clown and you actually being Bozo the Clown." Right? I understand why this is important, and I tell everybody around me, and the people who care to listen, here you are. Rinse and repeat. Every one of us annoy the hell out of 2 or 3 people. Maybe they'll get it, maybe they won't. Maybe one of them will understand. And when they understand, they will go out and annoy the hell out of 2 or 3 more people. And you know what we call that in science? Exponential growth. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that within a decade, at most 2, some form of cryptocurrency, possibly Bitcoin, possibly something very like it, will be prevalent, mainstream, and uncontroversial. And until that time comes, I am happy to be the lunatic on the stage. Thank you. All right, who's got a question? Yes. What's the future potential of blockchain technology within 5 to 10 years? I try to avoid making specific predictions more than a couple of weeks out, because this space is moving so fast. My full-time job is keeping track of what's going on, and I can barely keep up. So I don't know what will happen in 5 years. It's very short term, and what you've got to realize is the time frames we're talking about. There have been 5 major transitions in the technology of money. From physical objects with no intrinsic value, feathers, pebbles, tokens like that, to precious metals, jewels, to precious metals stamped with the face of a king, to paper money in the 15th century, and then credit cards in 1950. And how did the world react to each of these changes? If you were in 15th century Europe and you tried to present a certificate of gold deposit as money, everyone you tried to trade with would tell you that's not money, go away. Right? It took 400 years for paper money to become not only mainstream but dominant, and to become accepted as having value. And that's insane, because if you think about it for just 5 minutes, unless you've been indoctrinated as a child into this culture, the idea that a piece of paper has value that is universally recognized is bonkers, right? A lot of resistance, especially if they keep printing it. There was this fantastic BBC documentary in Zimbabwe during the hyperinflation crisis, and the journalist sees this old guy carrying a wheelbarrow with stacks of $100 trillion Zimbabwe bills to buy a bag of rice. A wheelbarrow. And so he asked him, "Aren't you worried about carrying so much money?" And he said, "I'm more worried about someone stealing my wheelbarrow." And then he asked him, "Well, why don't you use it as fuel? Why don't you just, if it's worthless, why don't you burn it to cook, to heat?" And he said, "Because paper money doesn't burn as well as goat shit." And there's this magical moment when you suddenly realize that your national currency is worth less intrinsically than dry goat shit. It's going to take decades, and if we do it in decades, that will be 4 times as fast as the previous transition to credit cards, and more than 100 times as fast as the transition to paper money, and more than 1,000 times as fast as the transition to precious metals and printed coins.
I have a couple questions. But one is regarding quantitative easing and the speed at which we're adding currency to the money supply.
Right, so quantitative easing and monetary policy.
Yeah, and kind of how you see the next, how you see the timeline of that, kind of going over the next 5 years, kind of what you think that it might do, and how that kind of connects to what's happening globally.
Well, that's an interesting question. This goes into broader economics. I went to a conference of bankers in London, and I started my talk by saying, I want to talk to you about a bizarre experiment in money that started in 2008. And I'm not talking about Bitcoin. I'm talking about the fact that 24 central banks have now conducted 650 interest rate cuts until they reached the lower bound of 0 with nowhere to go, and then got stuck there for 6 years while the economy died underneath them. And it's hard to explain to people who don't understand economics that before 2008, the idea of a single central bank going below a 0.5 percentage point in interest rates was considered monetary heresy, insanity. And here we are today, and now there are a dozen banks that are cutting their interest rates to negative, which means they charge you to lend them money. Right? If you deposit money into the account, they take some out every month. Because they don't want you to deposit it, they want you to spend it. And so what do people do? They withdraw their money and they put it under their mattress. This is a scary time. Bitcoin didn't happen in a vacuum. For those of you who are technical, you probably already know this, but it always tickles me. There's a message embedded in the first block of Bitcoin. The first block mined on the Bitcoin blockchain is called the Genesis block. And everything else derives directly from that and is linked directly to that. And Satoshi Nakamoto needed a way to prove the date at which this Genesis block was used. But he also did something quirky in there too. He put the headline from a newspaper. And that newspaper headline was The Times of London, January 3rd, 2009. Chancellor of the Exchequer approves second bailout of banks. That's a little hidden message in there. It tells you not only when Bitcoin was created, but I think it tells you why. Why that date. I actually auctioned off that copy of the paper for charity at a conference. Someone bought it for $27,000 for charity, just to have that headline. We live in a time that has never happened before. Just before World War II, After the first financial crisis in World War I, the banking system changed under the Bretton Woods Conference to de-link money from gold as a first step, allowing countries to exchange gold, but de-linking the value of the currency from the gold they had in deposit. In 1971, Richard Nixon took the next step and defaulted on the dollar by saying, up to now, you could take a silver dollar. It said $1 silver on the piece of paper. You could take it to the bank and you could say, I would like to exchange this. At the bottom of the note, it said, pay to the bearer of $1 silver. Check your money today. You do not have silver dollars. In fact, you do not have dollars. What you own is a Federal Reserve note printed by a private company owned by the banks, the Federal Reserve, which sounds very federal and isn't. And that moment started the most incredible expansion of money in the history of humanity, which led to inflation crisis after inflation crisis after inflation crisis, and most importantly, funded war. Because funding war out of taxes is hard. But if you send other people's children and pay for it with other people's money, funding war is easy. And so we funded war on a scale never before seen. And now that system is reaching its end of life. Currencies that are not attached to any value and have no limits on how much you can print have an average lifespan of 70 years before they collapse in a hyperinflation spiral that destroys economies. In Latin America, they have one every 10 to 15 years in most of those countries. We've seen it happen again and again, including in Europe, and we're going to see it happen again. And one day, I don't know when, it's going to happen to the dollar too. So Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just sound money with limits on how much can be created. It is sound money in a sea of currencies that are being inflated to the point where their value becomes less than that of dry goat shit. You had a question there? What's the safest way to store Bitcoin? All right, let me start with what is the unsafest way to store Bitcoin. The unsafest way to store Bitcoin is to forget the most important rule of Bitcoin, which is Bitcoin is money you control. It gives you the power to control your money. So the worst way to store Bitcoin is to give someone else control over your money. To give it to a bank, an exchange, to put it in a wallet for which you do not control the keys. The most important rule of thumb to remember in Bitcoin is your keys, your coins. Not your keys, not your coins. If you recreate the banking system and give them control, they run away with the money. We've seen that happen in Bitcoin again and again and again and again. But if you keep control of your keys and keep those keys secure, you have the fundamental control over your money. The best way to do that is either to be a security expert or to buy a device to do it for you that makes it easy. These are called hardware wallets. You can buy one for $30 to $100. I can take my Bitcoin hardware wallet. I can go to a cyber cafe in Moscow, walk up to a desktop that has more viruses than you've ever seen in your life, plug it in, and do a Bitcoin transaction without worrying about whether my money is going to be compromised. So it makes it easy for anyone to use it. But keep in mind, we are where the internet was in 1992. I tell the story of my first email. In 1989, I sent my first email on the internet. I connected to a mainframe, downloaded a compiler, downloaded a mail program, compiled it with Unix command line skills, And after 3 hours of work, computer science level work, I sent an email that took 3 days to transit the internet. 20 years later, my mother did the same thing by going swipe on her iPad, right? We are where the internet was in 1992. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of great designers, a lot of great user interface design to make it intuitive, to make it secure to use, to make it secure to hold. But here's the best part about that. When you join when it's hard, the people who follow you who have it easy pay a premium. The early adopters get to experience the future of money today while it's hard. Learn it to a level that you don't get to learn it. Just like sending an email in 1989. Most people would consider that an exercise in futility. But what it taught me, and what I took forward as skills, created a career for me for 10 years or more. So it's worth the effort. Don't put all your money in Bitcoin. Don't put even a small fraction of money in Bitcoin. Just a tiny amount so that you can try it. By the way, anybody who doesn't have Bitcoin, who has a smartphone and can get cell service here, a lot of ifs, download a Bitcoin wallet. I can tell you which ones you could try and use for iPhone or Android, and I will give you your first Bitcoin. Not a Bitcoin, because I'm not a Bitcoin millionaire. I'll give you a couple of dollars in Bitcoin, and with that you can make about 20 transactions, and you can experience for yourself how it works. Yes? Beginner tutorials on Bitcoin. This is difficult, right? My job is education right now. It's difficult to get good quality knowledge about Bitcoin. I've written 2 books on the subject. My first book, Mastering Bitcoin, is for software engineers. If you're a software engineer, you want to understand exactly how it works, soup to nuts, that's the book for you. My second book is a collection of talks published 15 days ago called The Internet of Money. And it's about why Bitcoin matters. It's this philosophical level discussion of how it empowers people. Neither will help you get started. Video tutorials on YouTube. I've done a number of videos. I teach a university course for the University of Nicosia, which starts at a very introductory level. It's free. It's a massively open online course. Stanford has a massively open online course that you can subscribe to learn about Bitcoin from scratch. It doesn't require technical background. So there are a few limited sources, but it's still very, very difficult. There's a very steep learning curve. Yeah, play with it. Start playing with it at amounts that you can afford to lose. Question?
Is there actually any coins? Is it backed in gold? Is it just on the internet? How does
Bitcoin, in Bitcoin there are no coins. There are no physical coins, but there aren't even virtual coins. It's a ledger. It's difficult to explain, but Bitcoin doesn't have any coins. There's no physical token of Bitcoin. It is money abstracted from physicality as much as possible. It exists on the internet. Its value is derived from exactly the same place the value of every currency you've ever used is derived. None of the currencies you've ever used is backed by gold. There is no gold in Fort Knox backing the US dollar. That stopped in 1971. The value of currency is the shared hallucination that we have as a society that if you take this dirty green piece of cotton to another person in this country tomorrow, they will give you something to eat or drink or use in return for that. If you hold that belief, and that belief is fickle, because societies collapse the moment that belief stops being real. The moment you take it and they say, I think this is worthless, the illusion disappears and the currency spirals into inflation and dies. It's happened many times. There are no coins. There is no gold. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't derive value. It derives value from an economy that has a size of about $10 billion and velocity. It derives value from utility. It is useful. And in some countries, it is useful to the point of life and death.
We'll work on that.
And it derives value from the fact that it is backed by energy resources that are used to control its creation so that you cannot create unlimited amounts. So it's rare. And that artificial scarcity, being rare, has never happened in the history of humanity before for a digital thing, an intangible. And it is the magic that makes it work. One more question. Who's really dying to ask a question? Go ahead.
What's to say the government wouldn't shut it down? Like, let's say we all invested in it, and then all of a sudden it does actually take over.
That's a great question.
Screw you guys, and then now we have no money.
What's to say the government doesn't shut it down? Really only one thing. The fact that Bitcoin has nothing that you can shut down. There is no central server. There is no central anything. Bitcoin is a loose coalition of servers that can appear and disappear, communicate in an encrypted fashion over the internet, use any form of medium they want. I can embed a transaction into a song, into Skype emojis, into a Craigslist ad, as a poem, as a series of 12 English words spray painted on a wall. In fact, I have. I took a transaction that didn't belong to me, just from the public ledger, for $150 million. And I put it inside a photo of 6 kittens. So if you think you can stop a form of money that can embed itself in the most important form of content we have on the internet, billions of cat videos. If you think you can stop something that I can spray on a wall, write on a piece of paper, speak to someone in person or over an encrypted call, with servers that exist nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, and use as their foundational system the internet, by being indistinguishable from all other forms of communication on the internet. The only reason the government hasn't shut it down is not because they're not trying. It's because they can't. And if they manage to disrupt Bitcoin, what they will do is far worse. They will feed its evolution. Bitcoin is a system that evolves in a decentralized fashion. That means it has an immune system. You fuck with one part of Bitcoin, there are 1,000 programmers that day who will rewrite that bit of Bitcoin so it cannot be fucked with. And then you've got one less thing to fuck with Bitcoin. And we keep iterating that. Every time you attack a host, it gains immunity. What doesn't kill it makes it stronger. And if they kill it, the day after we resurrect it. And we call it Bitcoin 2. All right, one more, because you've been begging to ask a question. Go for it, please.
Yeah, no, I've been studying politics and economics and secret societies and the banking structure for 20, 25 years. And I can say that every single thing that you're saying is absolutely 100% true. And I support you absolutely in everything you're saying.
Thank you.
And also, what you're saying about it coming back home here, eventually it will, and it's inevitable. But I wanted also to just say that, what you could possibly speak on, which would be good, is that how the banking system and the global system itself is getting ready to unveil their own forms of digital currency, and how they're not going to be like Bitcoin, they'll still be inflation. And can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, the fight is coming. And one of the fantastic things that's happening now is we're beginning to hit the zeitgeist. It is going to be a fight between eCoin and Bitcoin. How many of you here watch Mr. Robot? A few people. If you haven't seen it, it will blow your mind. That fight is coming. And I am perfectly confident that that fight is one we win resoundingly, and it's really a simple equation. If you create a coin that you control, the ability to control immediately creates the responsibility to control. In our system of government, ability equals liability, responsibility. If you can control transactions, you must control transactions. You must monitor, freeze, seize, and censor transactions. You must interject yourself in the communication. If the banks create a system that they control, it cannot be open, it cannot be borderless, it cannot be decentralized, it cannot be censorship resistant, it cannot be open to participation, and it cannot be open to innovation without permission at the edges. If they control it a bit, they must control it totally, or they go to jail. Because the system they built is the gilded cage they now have to live in. If they build a system they don't control, it's a waste of time because we already have one of those, and it's called Bitcoin. And it's bigger, faster, better, and getting better every single day. The magic of Bitcoin is not digital currency. The magic of Bitcoin is not the blockchain. The magic of Bitcoin is decentralization, removing power from the center and spreading it as far as possible. It's the same magic that makes the internet what it is today, that gives it power and makes it uncensorable and impossible to shut down. The same thing that means you cannot unpublish something that's on the internet means that you cannot stop something that's on Bitcoin. And that power creates a system that has certain characteristics. It doesn't matter if it's called Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of the other systems that exist out there. Don't pay attention to that. Ask the following question. Is it open, decentralized, borderless, transnational, global, open access, permissionless innovation, censorship resistant, and as anonymous as we can possibly make it? If you answer yes to those questions, that's the right one. And they can't say yes to any of those questions. And with that, we have to wrap.
Maybe to end off, just like one thing people should do as they do one thing leaving this festival, what should it be? And then we close up.
Use it. Don't just read about it. Don't just watch a video about it. Use it. Download a wallet. I will give you some Bitcoin today so you can try it out. Download a wallet and use it. And once you use it, try to understand how it is different from everything you've seen before. And then spread the word. And one day you will remember you were here today.
That was totally awesome. Thanks so much, Andreas. I totally get that. The best way to explore these systems is to go and get your hands on them and actually practically use them. So go download a Bitcoin wallet, go download an Ethereum wallet, try it out, get some experience. Next up, we're going to have the crypto party, which is basically Noah Swartz and his friends are going to be showing you how to protect yourself online, prevent surveillance, and essentially protect your digital rights. It'll start up in probably about 5-10 minutes or so, so come back, bring your friends, and prepare to learn to protect yourself against the matrix.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you